Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I'm so happy you're here. I wanted to do a little series on the fact that there are no pathologies in internal family systems, that every diagnosis in the DSM-5 can be explained as a cluster of parts that are adapting to trauma, to attachment wounding, to socialization, that every person and part makes sense. So today I'm actually going to introduce the topic and talk to you a little bit about bipolar disorder and how to translate that bipolar disorder into parts language. So I'm going to share my screen because, it looks like let me go back. This is a PowerPoint that I originally made for the monthly IFS practitioner group that generally meets on the second Friday of each month, unless I need to postpone. It's a wonderful group of practitioners, and we have topics that we discuss together. There's Q&A, case study presentation, working with our own parts around our clients. So if that sounds like something supportive to you, you're welcome to check out more about it on my website, theordinarysacred.com. So originally I presented this to them, and just the fact that there's no pathologies in internal family systems. So we can identify the parts behind common diagnoses. So every part and person makes sense, like I said. Every pathology outlined in the DSM-5 can be understood as a cluster of parts developed as an adaptive response to trauma, attachment wounding, or socialization. From anxiety disorders to dissociative disorders, depressive disorders, eating disorders, addictive disorders, personality disorders, etc. Every symptom makes sense. You can see even right in all those titles, disorders. I get, what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that there's behaviors and emotions that are extreme and maybe causing harm or issue in that person's life or other people's lives. But they're actually very ordered, very intentional. If we go inside and ask, they are adaptive, not maladaptive. Or they, at least at one time, were very adaptive, and they might need to be updated. They might not be adaptive anymore. So instead of asking, what is wrong with you? We ask, what happened to you? How do you make sense? Instead of saying, let me medicate you or manage you, you're innately flawed in some way, we say, let's figure out what happened and how your system organized and how you make sense and how we can help those parts. So originally when I made this, I wanted to make a note on neurodevelopmental disorders because many of them are in the DSM-5. Things like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. Because the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I have talked to my own parts who are highly sensitive on the spectrum, etc. I've worked with many people diagnosed with ADHD. I have diagnosed people with ADHD. And my experience is that many of their parts were not developed from trauma. They can sometimes have certain parts that are developed from trauma. You just have to go inside and ask, and the parts will tell you directly. But often they were just naturally valuable qualities that were different than what's considered quote unquote normal in society, right? Neurotypical. And because they're different, they were seen as bad. And so then sometimes we actually experience trauma because our naturally valuable qualities are not accepted in the culture, and those qualities have to be exiled inside of us. So we develop these really big managers to exile them, or maybe we develop firefighters to help numb and soothe our pain, the pain of these parts that have to be exiled. right? So the trauma is not, or the diagnoses and the cluster of behaviors, et cetera, is not in response to trauma. It's a naturally valuable state that then elicits trauma. So I hope that makes sense. Um, you know, so much. There was a guy I saw recently, I think on YouTube, that was trying to describe the difference between neurotypical and neurodivergent people. And he was saying it's just like you have a PlayStation and an Xbox, and they have different operating systems. And one is not, people might argue one's better than the other, but they're not better. One's not better than the other. They're just different in the way that they operate. So one game from an Xbox you can't put in a PlayStation game you can't put in the Xbox. So you have to treat them differently, but they are not, one is not disordered. They're just different, right? So that's another helpful explanation. Another note is that diagnoses often reflect symptoms rather than the root causes. So even, these examples that I'm giving here are physical. So this also happens with physical diagnoses. Like the word fibromyalgia is the big fancy word that just means that you have pain all over your body. So you go into the doctor and you say, I have this pain all over my body and I don't know why. There doesn't seem to be a source. And the doctor says, that's called fibromyalgia, which means you have pain all over your body and you don't know the source. And just side note with that, with understanding mind-body syndromes, the source may very well be trauma and socialization, stress in a person's life. It can be a very mental, emotional source of very real physical pain. But because medical doctors aren't often looking for that, they will say, oh, there's no source, we don't know. Or peripheral neuropathy, right? You go in, you say, I have numbness in my hands and feet. And they say, aha, you have peripheral neuropathy, which just means that you have numbness in your hands and feet. It's not telling you what the root of it is, right? A lot of people think, oh, the diagnosis is the root. I just have peripheral neuropathy. But no, that's just describing a symptom. But what's happening? Do you have a pinched nerve? Is there, what's the source of it? Another funny one was menorrhagia, I think is how you say it. I went into the gynecologist. I said, I'm having, heavy bleeding during my periods. And the gynecologist said, aha, you have menorrhagia. And I had fearful parts. Oh my, that sounds so scary. And then I looked it up, and menorrhagia means that you have heavy bleeding during your period. So, even as an educational therapist, when my students, their parents would come in, they would fill out a questionnaire about their child, and I would say, oh, your child has ADHD. And they would say, oh my goodness, oh no. And I would say, no, 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 you already knew that. You're the one who told me that. So sometimes the label can create a lot of fear, a lot of stigma, a lot of shame. Other times it can be really freeing. Oh my gosh, I really have something legitimate. But it's just a description of what you already know you have. I guess there's part of me that finds that humorous. Okay, so let me get into bipolar disorder. Sometimes people refer to it as manic depression, where you have these big highs, big lows, and they can alternate month to month, week to week, day to day, within the day, but they're really extreme. I really like this graphic here that was designed by Mike Elkin and Ann Cinco for a training. So you've got several parts involved, right? There's a cluster of parts in this diagnosis. You've got a firefighter that is manic, right? That brings the system's energy up really, really high. But it's often reacting to this gloom or doom management or firefighter. It depends on if it's happening to in response to pain coming up in order to kind of try to soothe it, or if it's just trying to manage your life. But the gloom and doom team closes down the body's energies. So this is very much hypoarousal, and this is hyperarousal. And you might have heard me or others say often that a polarization like this is a burden system's way of trying to achieve balance. It's like two men in a boat that keep leaning out further and further and further, because if this one leans out, it's going to tip over. So I've got to lean out in an equal and opposite direction. So the more extreme this depressive part is, essentially, the more extreme the manic part feels like it has to be in order to bring energy into the system and bring the system out of hypoarousal into hyperarousal. Now, often what's also involved here is a critic, a manager that beats up and judges and sends messages of worthlessness, likely to both of these because it feels like they're both extreme, right? Get off your butt. How dare you lay in bed? You need to get things done. Oh my gosh, you're too much. You're too crazy. You're too energetic. Calm the heck down, right? So you can have critics for both of the extremes. But what's really important to understand is that underneath is the exile, is the root that fuels the whole process, which is an exile that holds deep shame and worthlessness. And this could have been developed in many ways in childhood through bullying, through neglect, physical, mental, sexual abuse, through having some kind of quality, like I was saying, maybe you're a neurodivergent person or an LGBTQ person who has not been accepted by your culture. And so you've had to exile these parts, and there's a lot of shame and worthlessness that they hold for their authenticity. And it causes a lot of stress in the system. That pain causes a part to say, I can't handle all of this pain. I'm just going to shut us down. That's how I'm helping the system. And then this part, the manic part, tries to balance it out. And then you've got the critic that actually creates more shame. And the critic also beats up the exiles too, or usually there's a group of critics. But so you've got this whole cluster of parts that's really desperately trying to help the person. So there are often 3 or more protectors and at least 1 exile involved in this diagnosis. Depression is often a defense mechanism of a group of parts who believe that taking all the energy out of the system is a way to protect it. So often when people have a depressive part, a part that takes all their energy, takes all their motivation away, I try to work with the parts around the depressive part that hate it for understandable reasons and say, but if you can give us space to go toward the depressive part, to just get curious about why it does this. What are you afraid would happen if you gave us energy? And the answer is always so enlightening. It usually will either point down to an exile and say you would feel so much shame and pain, terror, panic, whatever the exile is holding. Or it might point to a part that it is polarized with. In my experience, that could be the manic part. So in the diagnosis of manic depression or bipolar, that's often the case. But sometimes a depressive part will point to, say, a people-pleasing part, or a perfectionist part, or a rule-following socialized part that pushes the person to do things that are inauthentic to them, right? Or pushes them beyond their physical, mental capacities. And it says, these parts are so extreme, I have to just shut the system down so that they'll stop, because nothing else will get them to stop. And of course, then that's very helpful, because the depressed part says that part, that people-pleasing part, that perfectionist part is is extreme. So now we can say, can I go to them? Can I help them? And if we can help them relax, we can help this one come a little bit outside into the boat, then the depressed part can also come into the boat and lend us more access to energy without the manic part having to pull us into like really hyper arousal. So manic parts are polarized with depressed parts, and they want to give the system more energy. So manic parts also have good intentions. Every part has good intentions. So if we can get curious about it, what are you might ask the manic part, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this? And it's like, he's going to take over. The depressed part's going to take over. And so then you can say, okay, let me work with him. What are you afraid would happen if you didn't depress the system? Well, all the pain of the exiles would come up, or the critics would get loud and too crazy. Okay, can I go to the critics? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't criticize? The shame of the exile would come up, right? Okay, can I go to the exile? And then ultimately, this is the root, going back to the exile's wounds and witnessing them reparenting, redoing scenes in the past and retrieving them, taking them out of the past because they're stuck there, bringing them into the present, updating them, unburdening them with those beliefs of worthlessness and shame. And the self energy in the system, I like to always think of kind of the blank space around this as the self. The self holds all of these parts, can allow them to be, can allow them to express themselves, can give them immense appreciation, and can say, but I can be with you all. I can reflect your worth. I can hold you. And that's where the healing comes. Okay, so just continuing to explain this here, critics come in to scold the extreme nature of both the depressed and manic strategies, as well as the exiles often. And then exiles feel shamed and exhibit painful emotions and beliefs that then activate the depressive parts, setting off the cycle again. So you can see how it just continues on and on. So yeah, we can get curious about the depressed parts and what they protect. And you can get curious about all the parts. They will point you to where you need to go, and then you just continue on that path of curiosity. And that's really where this work starts, and it will lead you all the way home. If you can get a little bit of space from parts who, are afraid or frustrated, to just be a teensy bit open and curious. You can start with any part, usually one of the protectors up here, and eventually they might point to each other, and eventually you'll get to the exiles once they gain your trust, and you can help them. And unburdening the exiles will unburden the whole system so that they no longer have to be so extreme anymore. They cannot stop doing their job until what they protect is healed. So there's lots of compassion toward them. All right, I hope you appreciated that. If you have any questions, or maybe you have comments about your own experiences with depression, anxiety, manic depression, bipolar, feel free to leave them in the comments below.